A ruling from the nation's highest court opened the door for more people to legally carry a firearm in public in Hawaii. The counties and the state legislature are already moving to declare some places off limits. Gun advocates say those rules are too broad, while others want a uniform set of laws statewide. This live broadcast and live stream of KΑKOU, Hawaii's town hall, start now.
Aloha and welcome to KAKOU, Hawaii's Town Hall, live from the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Multimedia Studio. I'm Yunji de Nies. Last summer, the U.S. Supreme Court expanded gun rights, paving the way for something that Hawaii has never experienced: citizens being able to legally carry guns in public. All 4 Hawaii counties are now issuing concealed carry permits, which means the person next to you in a restaurant, walking down the street, or in traffic could be legally armed with a loaded firearm. We visited a gun shop where the staff showed us what the holsters used to carry a concealed firearm look like. These feature a gun and an extra magazine. Once in place, you can see how it could be pretty hard to tell that someone is armed. Both Honolulu and Hawaii County have passed laws to restrict where those carrying guns are allowed to go, banning them from so-called sensitive places. On Oahu, under the recently passed Bill 57, these include government-owned buildings, schools and child care facilities, public parks, shelters, election polling places, public transit, businesses that serve alcohol, large public gatherings including protests, concert venues, cannabis dispensaries, hospitals, and specifically Hanauma Bay, Hawaii Children's Discovery Center, Honolulu Zoo, and the Waikiki Aquarium. Mayor Rick Blangiardi will sign Bill 57 into law tomorrow morning. Lawmakers in the State House and Senate are working on measures that would apply similar restrictions statewide. So the question is, given that citizens can now carry guns here in Hawaii, should the government restrict where those guns are allowed? KΑKOU means all of us, as in we are all in this together. So we want to hear from you in our discussion tonight. You can email or call in your questions. We're also streaming live at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii Facebook and YouTube pages. In our town hall tonight, we have law enforcement, lawmakers, Second Amendment advocates, and those fighting for stricter gun control. So let's begin our discussion. Captain Carleen Lau heads up the Records and Identification Division for Honolulu Police Department. Can you walk us through the concealed carry permit process right now, what it takes to actually obtain one of these permits, how many have been applied for, and how many have been granted?
Sure, thank you. Recently, since the passing of the Bruin decision and HPD, we had to revamp our policies and procedures in how we issued the concealed carry or the license to carry firearms. We had a public hearing to hear the public's input on what HPD should do and the feedback on our policies. We took into consideration those public opinions, and then we finalized what we call the rules of the chief. The rules of the chief are what govern HPD as to how we issue the license to carry a firearm. It was basically everything that we have in state law right now, and then it is taking a reasonable approach as to who should have and who shouldn't have, as far as including training, education, and background checks, medical history, and things like federal prohibitors. So anything like federal prohibitors, all of that, were all taken into consideration. So it wasn't like HPD started from scratch. It was something that kind of was already there, and then we built upon that. We did some research with other states, and so what we came up with was something where the concealed carry, you could submit your application, and after submitting your application, it has to be complete. And part of the application process, you have to go through training and education. So it's 4 hours of classroom training, 2 hours live fire. You have to, it has to be conducted by a HPD verified or certified instructor. And once they pass that, there's a certain minimum threshold. Once you pass that, you submit that with your application packet, sign waivers to have HPD allowed to conduct medical background checks, psychological, send things to the doctors, hospitals, to make sure that you're clear and you're okay to carry a gun in public. And after all of that, it comes to us, it goes through a review process, and then it's finally sent to the chief for review and signing.
And let's talk about those numbers. How many people have applied for this and how many have been granted?
Okay, can I check my notes?
Yes, of course, yeah.
Okay, so today, the concealed carry applicants, we have 682. And for those 682, we have 980 firearms for those applicants. For open carry, we have a total of 4 applicants applying for 12 firearms, and approved, we have a total of 59 applicants who have been approved for concealed carry and 84 total firearms. To date, we have no unconcealed carry firearms approved.
Okay, I want to go to Kainoa Kaku now, from the president of the Hawaii Rifle Association. What are your thoughts about the permitting process that she described and how this is going so far?
It's going terribly. It's an extremely slow process, and those on my side think it's been drawn out. So we've been hit with a bunch of circumstances living on Oahu. If you don't know, the Koko Head Range has been closed since September. So not only was the process delayed from June when the Supreme Court decision was decided, it dragged on to October for a hearing, and then the chief of police didn't sign off on their new process until November. And by that time, the range had already been closed for 2 months. So they added all these additional, you just heard the bevy of requirements in order for anyone to get their concealed carry permit. They added on a bevy of new rules, and then there's nowhere for us to actually go train unless you can, go to an indoor range or find someone with private property that wants to let you shoot on their property. It's, in my opinion, way too restrictive. And what we fear is, with how slowly it's been going, even since the new rules are in place, right? A lot of these applications were pending prior to that, mine included. And I am one of those instructors that's certified by HB to teach the course. But even after finally getting all the rules approved, we've only got 59 people. Even though there were hundreds of applications pending before then, so HPD had more than enough time to do their due diligence and background. And by the way, we're already in their system because we own guns, and we have it registered with the Honolulu Police Department. And our greatest fear is that with the legislative session now happening, when they do pass a new bill and enact additional rules on top of what HPD already did, if they change anything, we're pretty sure HPD is going to kick them all back and have us reapply again with the updated changes to that. And that doesn't seem like they're following the spirit or law or decision of Bruin at all.
Okay, well, let's move now to Chris Marvin. He is a veteran and part of the group Everytown for Gun Safety. What are your concerns with Hawaii residents now being able to carry firearms? And do you think that the permitting process, as she described, is, would you agree that it is too cumbersome and too slow?
Well, we have the Supreme Court making a decision that affects, Hawaii's ability to self-govern, right? And our ability to make laws that affect our citizens. It's something that we were a little bit surprised to see happen as a general principle. Normally, states can have the right to say, hey, we know what is best and safest for our citizens. Hawaii has always had strong gun laws, and we are an island geographically, islands. That's why we have the lowest gun violence rates in the country, right? Because of those laws. Now we're forced to make changes. Now, of course, this is the first legislative session since the Bruin decision in the Supreme Court, so the legislature is doing its job. They're saying, hey, we never had to have laws about where people could concealed carry a weapon because people just weren't doing that. And we have a ton of people in Hawaii who want to understand where guns are going to be so that they can understand where their kids are going to be safe and where they're going to be safe themselves. One of the things I like to point out all the time as a veteran is that one place you won't see guns carried is on Schofield, Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, or Marine Corps Base Hawaii, because the military doesn't think that letting people carry their own personal firearms is a good idea. So our nation's profession of arms has already kind of told us, like, we know that these folks know how to use guns, but they don't need to be carrying them on base, right? So Hawaii used to be like that, and we're going to make some changes. We're looking at less than 0.1% of the citizens of Hawaii who are applying for these permits. Do they have to wait a little bit? That's fine. The reason they have to wait to get their permits, to get certified, is so that we know that they're not dangerous people. so that we know that they are trained, that we know that they are safe, and they're going to keep our citizens, our children, everybody in Hawaii safe, you know, in a paradigm that we're just not used to. And so the legislature and the city council who are making these rules have done a lot of due diligence in actually a relatively compressed amount of time. And they're making good laws and good rules. And if you look at what they're doing, they're saying, where would guns make a situation more dangerous? Schools, parks, crowded areas, government buildings, protests. Like, these are places where the presence of guns will make it more dangerous for everybody. So let's restrict those. And they've done a pretty good job so far.
Well, let's talk to someone who's been working very hard on that. That is Tyler dos Santos-Tam, a council member and the chair of the Legal Affairs Committee for the Honolulu City Council. You championed Bill 57, which we talked about at the top. How did you create that list of places where you think guns should not be allowed? What is the sort of thinking behind that?
So this bill came to the council from Mayor Blangiardi back in November. And over the course of 5 hearings, we had the chance to hear from people on both sides about which places should be considered sensitive places. So we took the mayor's list and we got input from the public. We added in things like hospitals, which we all thought was a very reasonable place to consider as a sensitive place. Some of the things that the mayor proposed, though, we made more narrow and more specific so that people, including Kainoa, who's doing concealed carry, wouldn't be inadvertently in violation of the law. So there's definitely a balance that we tried to strike in keeping people safe, which was our primary goal, but also making it clear to everybody who has a license where you can do concealed carry and where you can't. For example, we looked at a situation like a parade or a marathon. Do you want to have 26 miles of a sensitive place along a marathon route? So we said, well, why don't we do it in a reasonable way and say where there's participants, that's where it is, and then once they're through, that's fine. Similarly, around polling places, you have a 200-foot barrier for electioneering already, and it's in the same vein. We don't want people with guns sort of threatening the democratic process. But of course, people live in those areas, so we wanted to have a way for people to traverse. So we took, I think, a very balanced approach, but we wanted to make sure schools, parks, hospitals, as Chris mentioned, large public gatherings, as well as businesses that serve alcohol. We know that that creates a higher risk situation. And so, we tried to strike that balance and identify those 13 places.
There were, of course, people who didn't necessarily agree with you on the council itself. 3 city council members voted against the measure: Andrea Tupola, Augie Tulba, and Val Okimoto. We did invite all 3 of those council members to join us here tonight. They did tell us that they had prior engagements and they couldn't be here. One of the things that we understand as part of the opposition is that there is a feeling, even though you said that you did try to target some of this, that it is just too broad. What do you say to that?
I think it's a policy question, and as Chris mentioned, Hawaii has had a history of strong gun laws, and that's resulted in us having the lowest rate of gun violence in the country. And so we wanted to continue with that trend. We didn't want to open it up and create a situation where we could have, like in many other states, a tragic occurrence in a business, in a school. Now, to the point of businesses, one of the questions that we had to grapple with is whether for businesses, they should be forced to allow guns within their premises, or whether that should be a choice. And the Big Island, chose to allow guns presumptively into businesses unless the business says no. Here in Honolulu, because we have hotels, because we have restaurants, because we have so many private businesses with all different kinds of approaches, we left it up to the businesses to say, if we want to welcome it, you can do that. If you want to prohibit it, you can also do that. And we also put in rules for signage. But the default right now is it is prohibited in a private business, just like any other private property, unless that property owner gives affirmative consent to do concealed carry within their property.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point, because there is this discrepancy that we see between our county and Hawaii County, and that's where I want to bring in Senator Rhoads. We know that you in the state legislature are working on a law that would cover the whole state so that it would not necessarily be county by county. Why do you think this is better regulated at the state level, and where do you fall in terms of how restrictive this should be?
Well, I'm not sure it should be completely regulated at the state level. I think it's still totally up in the air. It's completely up in the air as to what if anything, passes from the legislature. We'll know, by the end of the month. But I think there is something to be said for having rules that are specific to a county because they have specific situations that they have to deal with. So I think, for example, a council member said, or I think on your opening, you said that Hanauma Bay was an area that they were going to be considered a sensitive place. Well, the Hawaii County doesn't have Hanauma Bay, so I think there is some logic in the state setting a floor, and if constitutionally the counties can go farther and they feel like it's appropriate, then that's okay. But even that question has not been decided finally at the legislature. My colleagues don't all agree with me about that. Some think it should just be all the way across the state, it should be exactly the same.
And so you're saying that basically you would have two sets of regulations. We'd have the state regulations, and then if the counties want to go further and add more areas that be considered sensitive, they could do that.
Yeah, I mean, assuming that whatever they were proposing was actually constitutional under the Bruin case. So, I mean, this is not uncommon. There are other kinds of regulations that are like that where, you know, the county has a whole set of they have extra crimes that we don't have at the state level. And so it's not unusual to have additional or related items on any topic.
Okay. Representative Elijah Pierick is a Republican and the House Assistant Minority Floor Leader. Do you think the state or the counties, for that matter, should have these kinds of restrictions in place?
Well, thank you for the question. On January 18th, all legislators take an oath of office to defend the Constitution. So what we're talking about is something that connects to the Constitution, which says in the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So if my colleagues in the Senate or at the city county are trying to infringe upon those rights, they need to check their constitutional oath they took.
So you feel that any kind of sensitive places legislation infringes on an individual's rights?
To read again the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If we took an oath to do that, we need to do our job and prevent infringement.
Okay, well, let's bring in an attorney who's well-versed in this issue. James Hochberg is an attorney who has sued on behalf of Hawaii gun owners in the past. Tell us what your thoughts are on the sensitive places legislation that we're talking about tonight.
I would love to. Listening to my colleagues here, everybody's missing one point except for Representative Pierick. This is a federal constitutional right. So the legislature, the county councils, they regulate things all the time. You know, they legislate, they create rules and laws, but they can't do it if it violates the federal Constitution. And that's kind of what we're looking at here, because the Supreme Court last year in Bruin made it very, very clear that the tradition and history under the United States Constitution will guide whether something is an undue burden on the right to keep and bear arms or is not. It's kind of like, remember back to 1973, Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court said that's a constitutional right, and then for 50 years, localities were legislating things to make restrictions. Lawsuits were filed, courts answered, was it an undue burden or not? We're kind of embarking on, with the Second Amendment, the same process. Now, the interesting thing is, if people can accept that, because that's kind of a flashy point, but if they can accept that, we can all agree that we do want to protect constitutional rights from the government, because that's what the Constitution of the United States is for. It's to protect the individuals from the government. And in fact, I co-counseled, as you mentioned, the Livingston versus, at the end, the new chief of police. You have to change the name of the case as the chief changes. And we got a judgment in the state of Hawaii in federal court saying the old standard is unconstitutional. And that's what led to what happened at HPD and going on now in the state and the things. So the Second Amendment Law Center is a nonprofit charitable organization that will receive contributions. It's to ALC.org to help fund litigation here, Second Amendment constitutional litigation, to make sure that whatever the county, the police department, or the state come up with in terms of their regulations, stick with the standards addressed by the Supreme Court. And unfortunately for Hawaii, when it became a state, we were long past the Revolutionary War and the Civil War periods, which the Supreme Court is focusing on for the tradition and history. So although the councilman's correct, Hawaii's had a long, into the kingdom days and the republic days of gun regulation, when the Congress passed the Organic Act, they explicitly repealed the firearms laws in the Republic of Hawaii because it didn't square with the Constitution. So that's the problem.
I want to bring in actually a quote from the Bruin decision, because I think it really gets to the question of whether these sensitive places laws will be able to withstand a court challenge. So to that end, here is the quote, which led to the Bruin decision, of course, which led to the discussion that the changes that we're discussing tonight. This is Justice Brett Kavanaugh quoting the late Justice Antonin Scalia, quote, "Nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings." Now, given all of that, I'd love to go to you, Judge, to talk a little bit about if you think that these laws actually can hold up. Justice Randal Lee, just so those folks understand who we're talking to tonight, is a circuit court judge, now a professor in criminal justice at Hawaii Pacific University. So given that quote and all we've heard tonight, do you think that these laws will be able to stand up?
Whether we agree with the Supreme Court or disagree, it's the law of the land and we have to follow it, okay? The Bruin decision was an offshoot of two other decisions. The McDonald decision that said the person's Second Amendment right was a fundamental right and it was applicable to the state. The McDonald decision also recognized that it was important that a person should be able to have a gun for self-defense. The Heller decision affirmed that position and basically said the government cannot restrict you how you want to have a gun in your own home. The Bruin decision actually expanded that and now said dangers in the home can also extend outside of the home, and therefore the Second Amendment applies to public places outside of the home. That being said, though, the Bruin decision also said that the Second Amendment is not absolute, which means the government can restrict possession of a firearm. Okay, so I respectfully disagree with your interpretation of the Second Amendment. However, the problem with the Bruin case was that it didn't give us much leeway in terms of what constitutes a sensitive place. Now, I hear the councilman say, well, we met and we decided what places we should restrict. The problem is that doesn't meet the Bruin test. The Bruin test says you have to look at the historical and traditional history of the Second Amendment. If you didn't consider that, the Bruin case basically said any law that restricts that will be unconstitutional.
So do you expect all of these measures to be overturned?
Well, I expect some of it will be overturned because it's too broad, okay? And whether or not they apply the test in Bruin. However, the danger is when we submit a wholesale bill restricting different places, beaches, parks, sidewalks, buildings like that, you may actually get a law, it's going to be appealed. You may actually get a law that you don't want. Namely, the Supreme Court may say that sidewalks are not a sensitive place. At that point, you're stuck. So they have already said schools, courts, government buildings, polling places, and the Bruin case basically told the states use that as an analogous type of determination for sensitive places. But they also said the mere fact that a place is highly populated, that does not mean it's a sensitive place. Because their logic was, if you're going to say, well, a lot of people go to the park, you're basically eliminating the Second Amendment. You're restricting it.
And Judge, it's true too, right, that they also said the government has the burden of proving
That's correct.
that it's part of their tradition and
Yeah.
history.
So what the Bruin case basically said was the person's constitutional right to bear an arm is a fundamental right and will withstand any restriction unless the government can prove that historically and traditionally in the framing of the Second Amendment, this is what our founding fathers wanted to restrict. That's why we have what we have today. But they also said dangers on a sidewalk is just as dangerous as in an apartment or a house. So they basically signified that you might be able to carry a gun on the sidewalk in public because of the dangers that you may need a gun for self-defense.
The questions from our audience are piling in, and I want to respect them and bring them into our town hall in just a moment. But first, I want to go to Noguchi, a college student and member of Student Demand Action Hawaii. What are your thoughts about the sensitive place law, and do you feel that having something like that in place makes your campus safer?
Thanks for the question. I just kind of want to echo what Chris said earlier. You know, we've had really strong gun laws, and in part that has been really effective to not have as many gun violence incidents in our state. And, you know, as it relates to sensitive places, there's a really good reason why we should have schools as a sensitive place. You know, at Students Demand Action, we're really concerned about the gun violence that we see on the mainland. You know, mass shootings at schools are just tragedies, and we don't want that here. And, you know, take a college setting, for example. You could have as many as 100 students or even more in just one classroom. There's really no good common sense as to why we should go to class and be scared whether someone on our left or someone on our right might be taking class with us but have a firearm in their possession. I mean, I think that makes it a really unhealthy environment and really just anxiety-inducing for a learning environment.
Yeah, well, let's get to some of these questions. Don has this question, and Kainoa, I'd like you to take this one. I think the government should restrict where guns are allowed, but for those who do own guns, I'd like to understand why you feel the need to carry a concealed gun.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's completely nonsensical that if someone who has gone through background checks, has gone through training, is carrying a gun, why are you scared of them? It's not these people that are committing crimes in schools, right? Even if there's a law saying, oh, you can't bring a gun to a school, I don't think mass shooters respect that law. Do they? No. So guns are a stopgap. At the end of the day, the Second Amendment is about preventing tyranny. And this is tyranny at every single level. It's tyranny from your own government, it's preventing tyranny from a foreign government, or preventing the everyday tyranny of a criminal that wants to murder you, kill you, rape you, steal your stuff, jack your car. I'm not a criminal. I don't know what their reason is for doing what they do. I just know that by definition they're a criminal, and they're not going through their background checks to get their firearms. And if gun laws are so effective, why do we see gun crime? These aren't concealed carriers that are out on the street committing these crimes. These are criminals who obtain their firearms illegally. Just last year, there was the shooting up at Tantalus, where the shooter was not even 21 years old, so he's a prohibited person, and I believe his parents or mother and stepfather were HPD. And then there was the Waikiki shooting, also not someone who was 21 years old. So neither of these people were able to carry guns, but somehow they were able to obtain them and commit crimes with them. I and my colleagues that I train with, that are also veterans, like Chris, we just have a different opinion, and we don't feel that we should rely on someone else for our protection, especially since the Supreme Court has decided that the police are not responsible for your safety. They have no legal burden to protect you. Unless you're directly related to an officer, they do not need to protect you. So if they don't need to protect me, and they're minutes away when something happens, shouldn't I be allowed to protect myself?
Okay, well,
Right.
let's hear from Chris, and I want to bring in Margareta from Waialua before you go there. It says, gun control should start at home with parents educating children. Government shouldn't have a say as they will not do a good job. I'd like you to respond to what he said and also to her point.
Well, a couple things. That Kainoa named 2 shootings that most of us and probably a lot of reviewers are familiar with. If we lived anywhere else in the country, you couldn't name 2 shootings. Everyone's like, oh, I remember those, because they're happening every single day in states that have much more permissive gun laws than Hawaii. We have low gun violence because we have strong gun laws, because we have less guns. Kainoa also told us...
do you include Chicago and Detroit, places with very strict gun laws?
We're going to be interrupting.
States that have... We also lack terrestrial borders to states that have permissive gun laws. Kainoa also told us that he's not a criminal, and I actually believe him. I am not worried about Kainoa. I'm not worried about the people he trains with. I'm not worried about all the folks who are testifying before the legislature on these things. They believe in training. They believe in safety. They believe in accountability for their firearms. That's what I learned in the military. Those are the types of people who are going to be good citizens when it comes to carrying their firearms. But Senator Rhoads, Councilmember Dos Santos-Tam, they do not know Kainoa well enough to know if he's a criminal or not. He has to go through a process for us to figure that out. That's what this law establishes. It makes sure that the people that Kainoa wants to keep out of his school, the people that the criminals do not get their hands on guns. That's why we establish these rules. That's why we have background checks. That's why we have safety training. That's why we make sure that those dangerous people don't have guns. And the problem is the government has to make the law for everybody, right? That is KΑKOU, right? This is for all of us. The government has to make the law for everybody, not just for Kainoa and his gun aficionados, but for every single person who lives in Hawaii. And we as citizens have to know that we are safe. I do agree with your question from the audience that it does begin at home, but it also needs to be overseen by our lawmakers. They have a responsibility to us, and we have a lawmaker here who read the Second Amendment twice, and the first words of the Second Amendment are well regulated. So as a lawmaker, he has an obligation to regulate in order to protect his constituents.
Senator Rhoads.
The whole argument is I don't think a particularly good one, because the system we have right now has made us one of the safest states in the union. And people who want to have guns already have them. There's more guns than people in Hawaii. That should make us an extremely safe place. But we are an extremely safe place because of the things that Chris was talking about. We have very good gun protection laws. We also have geographical isolation, and that's why Chicago doesn't do very well, even though they have good gun laws. Indiana doesn't have any at all. So they just go over and they buy their guns and they come back and shoot each other in Chicago. The other thing that helps us is just, it's true that part of it's attitude. We don't immediately reach for a gun when we have a beef. But the 3 things together have been very successful. It's like we're number 1 in something, and the Supreme Court comes in and says, oh, we're going to change the interpretation. We're going to put in an interpretation of the Second Amendment that has never, ever before in the history of the country existed. And we're going to take away something that you're really good at, which is protecting yourselves from gun violence.
Let's hear from
Can I
Ted.
add something to
Just
that
one
for a
second. I'll get to you in a moment, but I want to bring this one in. Ted via email says, I agree guns are not needed in government buildings, but there are areas of high crime where attacks have happened, beach, parks, and where I am most afraid, that is going to my car in the parking lot at night after leaving a restaurant or a bar. Otherwise, no need for a firearm. So Councilmember Dos Santos-Tam, what do you say to Ted, given that he feels like the place where he could perhaps need a gun most, he won't be able to have one?
Yeah, so this was actually one of the questions that came before us in the 5 hearings that we had on Bill 57. And so again, we wanted to identify sensitive places, but for somebody like Ted, if he goes through this training, if he gets a concealed carry permit and parks his car and is traversing, through the parking lot, we put in specific rules around that so that he can, unload it or, take it out and carry it on him. And so we tried to at least be reasonable here. But again, to Chris's point, we're making laws for everybody across the board. And so for us, it's a determination following the criteria in Bruin, which includes places frequented by children. You look at analogous reasoning. Of course, we didn't have the concept of public parks per se, but we had town fairs and markets. And many of the colonies back in the Revolutionary time and in the Civil War time regulated what you could do in a public square setting like that. And so using that analogous reasoning, we can come up with rules. Now, people may disagree, and people may take it to court and say, well, this doesn't meet my interpretation of what the colonies did at the time or what they did in the post-Civil War era. But we, as policymakers, need to look at what's best for us as an island community, what's best for the people that we represent. And again, so schools, hospitals, parks, Hospitals weren't even said by the Supreme Court per se, but they are places where there is a historical tradition, laws from the post-Civil War era and a whole wealth of other policies that point to the fact that a government can say, for a place like a hospital, we want to declare it a sensitive place.
I want to get to you, and I'd like you to answer Sharon and Manoa. She says, this is just a comment, this will lead to deaths because there are too many people who are hotheads. I'm afraid this will make us like the mainland. Senator Rhoads talked about the culture here in Hawaii, how our inclination is not to reach for a weapon. What do you say to Sharon?
So hotheads aren't going to do well with buying a gun in Hawaii because you have to acquire a firearm, you have to qualify. It's been that way forever. And then if you want to carry, you've already qualified to own it. So if you're a hothead, the qualification includes getting a letter from your doctor saying that you're okay to get a gun. I mean, so it's not like what Senator Rhoads is saying. People in Chicago are going across the state line in Indiana with no requirements and picking up firearms and bringing them back into Chicago, and that's the problem. They're illegally holding those firearms in Chicago. They are criminals. That's the problem. If concealed carry permits were going to be the reason people were going to start getting murdered and hurt with firearms in Hawaii, before last November, we never would have had a shooting in this state. But we've had a lot of shootings in this state. It's not the carrier. It's not the carry permit. It's the criminal with the firearm.
I want to bring in the police captain on this one. How will any of these laws, restrictions stop crime? Will criminals follow these laws? I know that you can't necessarily answer that. That's from Frank via Facebook tonight. But I am interested in the burden that this places on law enforcement, both having more guns in the community and then also having to enforce something like Bill 57.
Well, first of all, HPD, we don't make the laws, and we leave them to the smart people here. But HPD, we have to enforce them. So with this being all new ground, we feel that our stance is that we just want something clear that the community, everybody can understand, and then also the permit carry people. So like license to carry, whether you're licensed to carry or you're a person of the community, we want something clear that everybody can understand. We want it statewide so that it's uniform, and that our officers, when they have to go do something, that they know what they have to do.
So let's say, just walk us through, now that, you said about 50 or so people now have these weapons. Mm-hmm. If I'm in a restaurant and this is supposed to be concealed and I can see it, is that person breaking the law?
At this point in time, we don't have legislation that prohibits that, and so we're closely following Senator Rhoads' bill, and there's a couple bills out there right now that we are, and HPD is also part of that, where we're asking the legislators to include that in the bill.
Okay, I want to go to the judge on that. I mean, where do you think that this will all shake out when it comes to that?
I think the enforcement issue is a big issue. I mean, by designating certain places as sensitive places, are we now acknowledging that these places have the potential for danger? And therefore, does government now have to enforce that? For example, do we need to put metal detectors into government buildings so that people coming into the government buildings, we can ensure our workers that someone's not having a gun? I don't know if putting a sign up saying don't come here unless you have a license is going to really stop someone. And again, the person doesn't have to show you their license unless it's the law enforcement that's asking you. So if it's a shop owner who says, do you have a gun? They don't have to answer you because you're not law enforcement. So it raises several questions. How are we going to enforce this? Are we going to wait until something unfortunate happens before the police come? So I think it raises a big concern, not only defining what a sensitive place is, but how we're going to prevent people with a carry permit into these areas.
Okay. I would love to get to you, Representative. Pearl in KΑKOU says, considering the shooting in Tennessee earlier this week, is it really that important that people have the right to carry a gun anywhere they please? Why does it seem that carrying a firearm is more important than preserving the lives of those who live here and don't carry weapons? What do you say to Pearl?
Yeah, well, Pearl and KAKOU, thank you so much for asking the question. So the person that was shooting people in Tennessee, that person broke the already existing gun laws. So if we think we have to build more gun laws to prevent more shooting, the person that did the shooting already broke gun laws. What we need is people that have concealed carry to protect those people that are breaking laws. We need people to have guns that are safe people, the teachers, to protect their students for when the person who's a criminal comes in to try to shoot the kids.
What do you think about that, Kyo?
I mean, I'm sure Chris can chime in, but I just don't quite see the common sense of that. I think it is the role of government to step in and address the health, well-being, and safety of its citizens, including students. You know, we make up the future generations of our society, and if not do it at school, then what's the point of it, you know?
Okay.
Just
Chris,
real
go
quick on mass shootings, which get a lot of attention, and I believe this is true of Nashville, but if it's not, it's true of many mass shootings. The shooter does not break gun laws if they acquire the guns legally, if it's easy to buy them. They break murder laws. They committed a homicide, but if they legally possess the guns, they don't break a law until they shoot and kill somebody. So that, I'm pretty certain that's how she legally acquired those guns in Nashville. So she didn't break gun laws because they didn't really exist in Nashville and Tennessee like they do here.
But it's not legal for her to have the firearms at the school.
Okay, so she breaks the law the minute she steps on school property.
Right.
Okay, and
So
without-
she steps into a sensitive place, exactly what we're trying to legislate and create here.
Representative, go ahead.
So murder's also illegal, but she still broke that law. The laws aren't going to stop the murder. The laws aren't going to stop the mass shooting. We need protectors in place to prevent the mass shootings from continuing. If we wait on the minutes of the police officer to respond, more shooting's going to happen. But if we wait on the mere seconds of the armed teachers to protect the students, then lives are being saved.
Senator Rhoads.
Yeah, no, I just completely disagree with the premise. So the premise is, which is the gun manufacturer's premise, is that if all of us in this room had a gun, we'd all be safer. Well, that's just nonsense. And if you look at other countries, if you look at Japan, for example, they had, of course, the prime minister was shot with a ghost gun, with a manufactured gun. But the year before that, the entire country of Japan had one gun murder, 128 million people, and they had one murder. You can't get a gun. Almost nobody owns a gun in Japan. There is another way to go and still be safe. If what Representative is saying was true, we would be the safest country in the world because we have 5 times as many guns in private hands per capita than anybody else. Yet we're not the safest country in the world. So just having more guns, it doesn't work.
Doesn't the logic go the other way, though, that since we own more firearms than anyone else in the world, by your logic, shouldn't we be the most dangerous country on Earth? Yet the most dangerous countries on Earth.
I would argue that there are, it's a good point, and I would argue that it just goes to show there's more than one factor involved. But the way the Second Amendment guys usually argue is that constitutional carry, I have a right to carry a gun constitutionally without anything, but it doesn't work. It doesn't make us safer. There's other factors involved.
Well, but
Kainoa,
the unfortunate thing is, you know, even though we disagree, that's the law. Are we going to
It is
say-
for now.
Are we going to say that we're going to disregard what the Supreme Court has told us what the law is?
No, we should.
We're a law-abiding country.
We
And when the Supreme Court said you have a right under the Constitution, okay, I respect your opinion in terms of protecting the public as well as having the gun rights. I think we need to have a balance, but by having just a wholesale, we can't go into a private area, can't go into a school. What about someplace like Hawaii Pacific University? They have classes at Restaurant Row. Does that mean if I had a carry, I can't go into Restaurant Row? I mean, look, I respect the sensitive place, okay? I do. But it's the law. Even if you think that the Supreme Court was totally wrong, it's the law. We have to follow it.
Senator
It says you
Rhoads.
have a right.
Well, I agree with that, but I think that the other thing that we should be looking at is whether that law is going to, I would predict, I'm probably too old to find out whether I'm going to be true, but I would predict that within a couple of decades, Bruin will be overturned because there will eventually be a liberal court and they're going to look at that decision and go, this is ridiculous. Why did we decide? If you just look at the language of the Second Amendment, it doesn't say anything about any of this stuff.
And I agree with you. I totally agree.
It's going to be Roe v. Wade, only the other direction.
But for the here and now, we have the laws that we have. So I want to.
But the Supreme Court addressed that, and they said the regulated militia is not the National Guard. It's the people in their homes.
And
so
they overruled,
that's been solved.
And they overruled an earlier case to do it.
Let's get to some more viewer questions, and this one is for the councilman tonight. There's just a lot of confusion as to where people are allowed to have guns. So someone in IAEA, are guns allowed in public housing? Are we allowed to prohibit someone with a permit from carrying a weapon on our own private property? And there was, in this big pile of questions that I have here, and please keep them coming, we appreciate it. There was a question about the permits or the signage that you are going to require if I have a business and I don't want guns or I welcome guns. How do I make that clear to people?
Yeah, so, going back to the Constitution, going back to what the Supreme Court said in the Heller decision, you have the right to have a gun on your private residence, whether that's public housing, whether that's an apartment that you lease, whether it's a home that you own, you're allowed to do that. So to the question about public housing, yes, you're allowed to do that. And
not under SB 1230 House Draft 1.
Well,
no, you're not.
That's
if you ride public transportation, you can't.
So what I was saying is under the current case law, that's the situation. So to answer the question about public housing, that's that. Now for private property, again, we are a country of laws, and private property rights is one of the main legs of our constitutional stool. And that's why we said for private property owners, they have the right to determine it or not. Because if somebody is doing something, if you're, here's another example. If you're a restaurant and somebody comes in, no shirt, no shoes, you can, as a restaurant, say no shirt, no shoes, no service. Because you're not following the policies that me as a restaurant owner, private property owner have set to be here. In the same way, we said, if you as a business, don't want to allow this or choose to allow it, it's your choice. But somebody can't just come in, literally or figuratively, guns blazing, to your place of business. And so we wanted to make it clear. We wanted also to have clear signage, because we didn't want somebody to put up a little sign and trap somebody or create a situation that's confusing. The hostess at Zippy's, we want the sign to be outside so the hostess at Zippy's doesn't have to explain this to everybody. And so one thing that I think the mayor is going to talk about tomorrow is where the city is going to be providing signage, because we know either way, people are going to be upset whether you want to allow it or not. You're making me pay for a sign. We're going to be providing signage, at least in this initial round, to make it clear where guns are allowed or not.
Okay, and I want to go back to you. I can't find it in here because there are so many questions, but there was a question earlier about the evaluation, the permit process, how often that has to be renewed. If I've applied for this permit and I've obtained a gun, when is the next time that my medical records and all of this will be revisited?
So it's right now, that as it stands, it's 1 year for each license. I know that's under review with different legislation going through, some want it 2 years, some want it 4 years. But right now with HPDA, it's every year. And as you renew it and you apply every year, you have to have a medical evaluation done.
I'd love to hear from you on that and what you think about having to renew it every year.
It's extremely burdensome. The state of Hawaii has created a really good system at deterring people from owning guns. It's an arduous process every single time we have to go through it. I, as a firearms instructor, own between 1,000 and 5,000 guns. I'm not going to give you the exact number, but despite—
I'm sorry, did you say 5,000?
Oh, I'm just throwing it out there. But even if owning all the weapons or firearms I do, when I want to get another one, I got to go get another permit, because the guns that I already own can't be used to do anything, right? It's that new one that I need to get. That's the one that's going to be the problem. But no, these things are so restrictive, and I want to make some clarifications. First off, Mr. Rhoads had mentioned constitutional carry, and in over half of our states we have constitutional carry. You got a gun, you pass the next background check, you're an allowed person, you can go carry your gun outside your home and you can defend yourself and anyone who happens to be in the vicinity. And when we're talking about sensitive places in schools, there are 33 states that allow concealed carriers to carry firearms in public schools, and private schools can make up their own rules. And there has never been one instance of a concealed carry or a lawfully permitted person carrying a gun on school grounds that has had a negligent discharge or injured someone with it. Not once. I want to let that sink in. But when we do have these mass school shootings, They are always targeting soft targets. They are targeting these gun-free zones because that's where they know that no one will be, because these mass shooters are cowards at the end of the day. And thank God in Nashville for Officers Engelbert and Colazzo, who took charge of the situation, entered the building, cleared it, and found the shooter and put her down. Because that did not happen in Uvalde, where for over an hour and 16 minutes, cops just sat outside while a mass shooter did whatever he wanted to in that classroom. And I work at a school, so I take this issue extremely seriously. And I know that if I have a gun on my campus and someone tried to do something like that on my campus, that person would be in the ground, okay? And the fact that we want to put the safety of our children in the hands of people that are far away. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have to go through a process in order to carry a gun in a school. I think there should be extremely strict training, because I don't want someone that doesn't know how to use a firearm effectively and safely to carry a gun in a school. And that's why I spend thousands of dollars every single year to make sure that I know what I'm doing, so that the people that I teach also know what they're doing.
You got to remember that Bruin also said registration and qualifications are constitutional. Any requirements that the state want to impose is constitutional.
Chris, I want to go to you to some of the points that he raised just now. You represent a national organization. What have you found in other states that do allow for concealed carry? What is the data showing? Because this is new to us here. What have we seen in other parts of the country?
Yeah, a couple of things leading to that to sort of clear up. We are the most dangerous developed country in the world. 40,000 gun deaths a year. There's no developed country that is more dangerous than us, and it's because of the Second Amendment and permissive gun laws. Second, in the 33 states that have permitless carry, concealed carry or open carry without a permit, many of them you don't have to pass a NICS background check to buy a gun, because they don't have a background check law on their state books. So as long as you don't go to a federally licensed firearm dealer, if you buy the gun online, if you buy it at a gun show, you don't have to pass a background check either. So you have people walking around in those states carrying a weapon that they didn't have to pass a background check to buy, and carrying it probably wherever they want.
I'm sorry, but you're factually wrong. If you buy a gun online from a gun store, it gets shipped to an FFL.
If you buy it on armslist.com from a private dealer, a private seller, you can buy it in a Walmart parking lot for cash. Okay?
Yeah, but that's not through online. You're meeting up with the
armslist.com is online. Right.
So
you can buy,
let me
buy
share with you.
Wait, let's let Chris finish, and then we'll come to you.
My brother-in-law wanted to give me a firearm for Christmas. It took 6 weeks because I had to have him send it from an FFL on the mainland to my FFL guy, federal firearm licensee that sells guns. It took me 6 weeks so that I could get it to where it needed to be, so I could go to HPD and apply to buy it or get it, and then I could go pick it up.
But is that 6 weeks? Is that 6 weeks so cumbersome? Like, is that? Are we not allowing for having some kind of a wait? Do you think that you should be able to get it the next day?
I'm all for safety. I think gun owners should be qualified, they should be trained and proficient and safe. I'm not complaining, I'm just addressing what Chris said, because that's not my experience.
It's because he lives in Hawaii, where we have good gun laws. That's why you had to take it through an FFL. If you lived in Mississippi, Texas, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and 30 plus other states,
but we're talking about
you wouldn't have to do it. That's right. And we're talking about making laws that will make our people safer. And you having to process that gun through an FFL, make sure that you are a reasonable, trained, safe, accountable gun owner, which I believe you are. And I don't think any of us believe that every person in Hawaii meets that standard, right? So that's why we're trying to make laws that keep everybody safe.
Senator Rhoads.
It's hard to accept the argument that it's so onerous to get a gun in Hawaii, because there are more guns in Hawaii than people. And, people legally, I mean, they own those guns legally, and there are more guns than people. So, it's not that hard.
Councilmember Tam, there are several questions here that say, Mary in Honolulu, I noticed there are no restrictions in churches. What is the status on that? Liz in Wahiawa says, Liza, does the Bill 57 public gatherings include churches? Where do churches fall in that?
Yeah, so churches are an interesting place, and what we're looking at with private property rights, churches are, of course, private organizations that can regulate their membership and the conduct on their property. So that's one piece. We also didn't pick these sensitive places out of complete thin air. We looked at the Bruin case, which set forth a number of criteria. There is a historical context, there's a historical tradition behind these. The court laid out 4 specific instances, and all of those are reflected in our sensitive places. But churches are an interesting one because it is a private property situation. So I think that's the lens that we should be looking at this through. Is this a place that allows concealed carry affirmatively? That's crystal clear. And so if there's a question, you have to ask the private property owner, because that's how it is. If you couldn't go to church, some churches say you have to wear a suit and tie. Some churches are much more lax. And that's kind of the beauty of where we are, in that you have these choices as a private property owner. And in the case of a church, it's up to the vestry or the leadership of the church to determine that.
Okay, Representative Pierick, I want to go to you on this one. This is from Angelica. She says, one of the panelists spoke about the Second Amendment. I am sick of people hiding behind the Second Amendment as a reason for having or wanting to have a gun. When the Second Amendment first came into play, we didn't have the type of guns we have today. For hunting, yes. For protection of their own home, yes. But the notion of having people carry guns and wanting to take it anywhere they want is BS. That's from Angelica. You shared that language with us, so how do you respond to her?
Well, Angelica, thank you for your question. If legislators have the opportunity to change the Second Amendment, we need to do that through a resolution. And that's calling upon our U.S. delegation at the House and the Senate to change the Second Amendment. I heard you say it's BS. We need to then, we can't change it at the county level and at the state level unless we're changing the actual Second Amendment. Now, there was a 2022 Supreme Court case that involved a few things. It switched things from being you may give permits for concealed carry to the you shall do it. Now, we talked a lot about precedents and historical context. That's analogous law. So at the time of the Second Amendment being ratified along with the Bill of Rights in 1791, there was a commentary written on that, and one of the signers wrote that commentary, and his name was James Madison. He wrote in Federalist Paper 46 that a well-regulated militia is basically a group of citizens who understand how to use firearms, protecting the federal government from infringing upon their local state. So when we talk about regulations and a well-regulated militia as the foundation of us today, creating county laws or state laws, we have to understand what the Second Amendment meant as well-regulated. And that was a well-organized group of colonists armed to protect themselves against the federal government. And so with that as our historical background, our analogous tradition, that's where we have to stand. And if we want to change things, we have to do it through a resolution changing the Second Amendment.
Okay, I want to bring in, this is a question from Mililani, and if you would answer this one. How long does it take from a mental health diagnosis to being registered as unable to possess a firearm? Basically, how many people, or if any, have you rejected through this process? And what is sort of the criteria for being rejected on a mental health diagnosis? Is that something that the doctor says, you know what, I don't think this person should have a gun? Or is that something that HPD does based on whatever diagnosis is written out in that person's medical record?
So thank you for the question. We get that a lot. And part of the mental health evaluation is that we send as the applicants sign their waivers, we send letters out requesting for additional information from the medical providers. We have a preset letter, so any information that the doctor sent to us, we don't have to interpret it. So it's basically, one of the questions is, are they a suitable person to hold and handle own firearms? And that's a clear yes or no answer. So that is one of the factors that we take in when we are evaluating the forms that come back to us.
And in the concealed carry process, I know it's still really early days, but have you turned anyone down yet?
No, not at this point.
Okay. Kyo, can you take this one? This is an opinion, but I'm interested to get you to weigh in on this. People with guns think they're going to protect themselves and others by taking the law into their own hands. Gun carrying creates fear and may compel others to carry as well. It is all too ambiguous. I'm interested in the kind of conversations that you're having with other student leaders on campus, since all of this is sort of in the process and we're learning as we go. What are the feelings that you're hearing from students on campus?
Yeah, of course I can't speak on behalf of all students, but in my personal opinion, there are some arguments saying that shootings at schools wouldn't happen if perhaps one of the students had a gun on them or if the teacher had a gun on them. I mean, perhaps, but I think there's an underlying presumption that exists, which there would be a student that comes to school every day with a firearm on them. And knowing that, I mean, first of all, I would feel incredibly unsafe, just to know that a classmate might have a gun on them. But two, I think it speaks to what the person is saying. It creates a really perverse incentive for me or for other students to bring a firearm on themselves, right? Because if someone's gonna have it and I'm not gonna have it, then I'm unilaterally at a worse off position compared to the students who do have guns on them. And so I think, to go back to what the speaker said, I agree with you, yeah.
Okay, let's bring in Kainoa. I want to bring you in this also because you are a teacher, and there's a question here. Is there a teacher or past educator on the panel that is interested in being trained on how to use guns? Obviously, we know you're trained there, but he says, as a teacher, I personally cannot fathom the responsibility of handling firearms. Do you think that it would make our schools safer if teachers were armed?
Absolutely. So there was a misconception that people on the gun rights side want everyone to be armed, and that's absolutely not true. My VP, who actually used to be my principal when I was going to school, she's like, I could never carry a gun. I might leave it in the bathroom. And it's like, yes, miss, we don't want you carrying a gun. All right, what we're talking about is people that take the safety of themselves and their students extremely seriously and are willing to put their life on the line. Concealed carriers are among the most law-abiding citizens in the country. In fact, where studies were done in Texas and other places like that, concealed carriers are often more law-abiding than the police officers themselves. And concealed carriers come to the aid of police officers to save their life, like what happened in Arizona in 2017. But yes, guns in the hands of people, I mean, we trust officers with firearms, right? Because we take the presumption that they are well-trained, that they are well-meaning, and that they have the safety of the community at heart. And individuals like myself that, again, spend thousands of dollars every year to make sure that I know what I'm doing, having me armed on campus makes that school a safer place and not a more dangerous place. And like I said earlier, in the 33 states that allow teachers to carry firearms on campus, there's never been a negligent discharge by a lawful concealed carrier.
David in Kauai has a question, and Judge, I'd love for you to take this one. Should people applying for a permit also be required to have something equal to no-fault insurance in case of accidents they cause while carrying a firearm, i.e. accidentally shooting someone? We are not a stand-your-ground state. There is a question of someone getting into an altercation, perhaps claiming self-defense, perhaps it's not self-defense. What do you think about this idea of having to have some kind of insurance? And what happens if I'm getting robbed and I shoot someone?
Well, the big problem with no-fault insurance is, nobody's at fault. Unfortunately, someone using a gun is at fault. So they should be held civilly liable, or civilly responsible, or criminally responsible. So I don't think the no-fault idea is a good idea. But we all agree that schools, for example, is a sensitive place. Okay, so the real question I ask for the panel is, what are we doing currently to prevent people from going into our schools with guns?
Nothing.
What are we doing? We all agree schools is a sensitive place. I don't think anybody disagrees. What are we doing currently? Maybe the state can tell us, what are we doing currently to make sure that kids coming into school aren't carrying that gun?
Well, I think campus shootings are a topic for a whole other show, but go ahead, Council Member.
Well, I think that the judge's question is a really interesting philosophical one, because on one hand, we could be like states on the mainland and say, well, people are going to have guns everywhere. We should let everybody do it. We should have them in school, and that will automatically make things safer. That's on one end. On the other end, we could metal detector everyone and check everyone and pat everyone down. Obviously, neither of these extremes is a reasonable position for us here in Hawaii. And so we need laws that meet common sense. We need laws that make it clear where you can and can't have it. And I know what's going to be said next, which is, well, criminals aren't going to follow the rules. But we don't repeal our laws simply because that's the case. We have common sense rules for a reason. We try our best with HPD to enforce them. And that's the kind of society that I think all of us would like to live in, one where there's common sense, reasonable boundaries. And I think one other topic that we've sort of missed here is with the proliferation of guns in our community, whether legally acquired, whether bought online, whether bought at a Walmart. The more guns there are in the community, there's a higher risk of guns being stolen, being used by a bad guy, and we see this all around the country, and we also see it here in Hawaii. And so one of the things that we need to do, whether it's through additional rules at the state or whether it's through better enforcement, is to deal with this problem of stolen weapons. And that's why I'm glad that one of the aspects of training is how to store it properly, how to make sure it's kept. But not everybody's going to do that. And the danger is when we get to 1,000 concealed carry permittees or 10,000, not every one of those 1,000 or 10,000 is going to be perfectly, securing things at all times, whether at home, in their vehicle, or in their office.
Chris, I see you nodding over there. Can you tell us what you're thinking?
Well, I keep thinking about the arguments that are made about the ability for an individual to have a gun at a school as a teacher, and they're anecdotal, right? That argument was about Kainoa and his expertise. The FFL argument was about, an individual and how they perceive their own ability to utilize a gun. And again, we're not making laws for one or two people. We're not making laws for gun aficionados. I think one of the most important things that we've done with these sensitive place laws, and I think, Judge, to answer your question, the first thing we're doing is that we are making it illegal. Because yes, as of now, it is not illegal to take a gun into a school in Hawaii because we never made the law, we never designated the sensitive places, right? When we were testifying before a House committee on one of the bills that's going through the legislature, a Second Amendment advocate brought a gun into the committee room at the state capitol because the law wasn't made yet that said he couldn't do it. Now the sergeant at arms came and talked to him and asked him to leave, and he did politely. It was easily resolved. But that's just to tell our audience that there are people, not people on this panel probably, but there are people who will get these permits, and they will, like water, they will find the path of least resistance. They will take their gun wherever they are not prohibited from taking their gun, right? And so we can't make an exhaustive enough list to protect every child in Hawaii, but we can try, and we've done as many as we can. And we're not just protecting the children, we're also protecting the business owners who aren't watching this show right now, who aren't paying attention to what's going on in the legislature, and will have no idea what to do. If I'm a 17-year-old hostess at a mom and pop restaurant and someone comes in with a gun, I don't know what the laws are, but thank God we've at least tried to make laws that say, unless that restaurant explicitly says you can come in with a gun, then you can't. And hopefully the small amount of people who obtain these CCWs, these licenses, they have gone through the training. Now they know, unless it says, yes, you can bring your gun in, they will be, most of them, law-abiding citizens and won't do it. And that 17-year-old hostess is kind of off the hook, and she doesn't have to know, SB 1230, version 1 or whatever.
Do you think that that is too restrictive?
It kind of blows my mind because every one of those schools that had mass shootings were no gun zones, and I don't know how we're going to tell the families there, we were protecting you by keeping the guns out and making it illegal. I don't get it.
Okay, I want to get to there's just a point of some clarification here, and Captain, if you could answer this: are permits granted by HPD only for Oahu people, or can they go off island? And then there were some questions here. How are you going to address tourists that brings guns into their luggage? That one is from Maui. What would the law be on concealed carry at the airport? That's for Spencer and Kalihi. I mean, there's just so much confusion as to what we're allowed to do.
Yes, there's a lot, and we get questions every day coming in. Well, first of all, there's no reciprocity between the counties. So if you get a license to carry here in Honolulu, it's only good here in Honolulu. And as I don't think I've seen any legislation going through proposing reciprocity. So I think in every county here in Hawaii, you're going to have to seek your own, each individual license to carry for each county. As far as the airports, that's going to be up to the federal law enforcement there, and what they're going to decide on how how to approach firearms illegally coming in through the luggage.
Okay. Justin from Waikoloa has a question, Senator Rhoads, I'd like you to address. Why is the government punishing law-abiding citizens by restricting their gun ownership when it is their right? People are trying to exercise this right, but their rights are being taken away. That's Justin.
We're not restricting their rights. This whole discussion is about how we're complying with the Bruin decision. And as I mentioned before, even in Hawaii, with our, comparatively speaking, strict gun laws, there are still more guns than people. So you can get a gun in Hawaii if you pass the qualifications.
Just can't carry it anywhere after they pass Bill 57.
Given the list that is quite exhaustive that we talked about, where can you carry a gun?
I mean, the list is so long, I don't know that I have enough time in the day to get through it. But it's just a backdoor ban on carrying firearms. So they're laughing in the face of Bruin is what they're doing. They're saying, okay, we'll give you guys permits eventually, but you can't carry it basically anywhere except this sidewalk and that sidewalk. Not that sidewalk, because that one's owned by the city and county. It's ridiculous. It's a backdoor ban.
It's not ridiculous, and it's not a backdoor ban. We have to comply with Bruin.
What I don't understand is why
we'll find out whether this complies with Bruin or not. I mean, because there's enough gray areas, I'm sure that Mr. Hochberg is getting his lawsuits ready to go already, and we'll find out whether what we're doing is constitutional under this Supreme Court.
Actually,
Are you planning to sue the city?
I am hoping that people watching this show that think the Second Amendment is worthy of supporting will make contributions to Second Amendment Law Center to the number 2 ALC.org. And we're going to use that money to make sure the Supreme Court tells our legislature and our city councils on the islands what Bruin permits and what it doesn't. And like I said at the beginning, what we're doing with Bruin is exactly what happened for 50 years with Roe. It's exactly the same thing. The Supreme Court announces a constitutional right that was disagreed about previously, and then legislatures wanted to restrict. Cases were brought, the court answered the question for 50 years, and I think that's what we're going to do.
Keo, I want to bring you in this. As a student, ask the student, he says, if you feel more comfortable on campus if there was a person with proper training that knew how to use a firearm and protect the students, not a teacher with a month of training. I assume that person is a law enforcement officer, a security professional. I mean, do you think that how would you like to respond to this person?
Well, as many things do, I think it depends. As you suggested, if it was, a police officer at school grounds, then I'm sure there's a lot more students that would feel comfortable about someone on campus having a firearm in their possession. But, if it was just some other person who was just trained or new to the position and they had a firearm on them, then I think that would cause a lot of commotion and discussion amongst students, just wondering what is going on.
There's actually a perfect anecdote for this. I think 6 or 7 years ago, there's a shooting at a community college in Oregon called Umpqua Community College, and there were 2 veterans who were actually involved in the shooting, not as the shooter. One of those veterans was a concealed carry permit holder, legal to own and carry a gun, but the school prohibited it, but he still had his on, right, like the water. And so he was in his classroom. He was a veteran, a combat veteran. He told his classroom, barricade yourself, get behind the desk, I'm going to take a position, and if this shooter comes in this room, I will be able to stop the shooter. He wasn't, because of his military training, stupid enough to go out on the campus and go find the shooter, because he knew the police who were responding would probably shoot and kill him. And he would just cause and add to the chaos, which is what more guns do, they add to the chaos. Ironically, the person who stopped the shooter was an unarmed veteran who tackled the shooter, got shot doing it, but was brave, tackled the shooter, ended the shooting, and the police came and the whole thing. So what you have there is the appropriate behavior of the guy with the gun and the veteran with the gun and the veteran without the gun, the good guy without the gun, who stopped the shooting. And so we need to understand that properly trained gun users, whether they're veterans or they've been really well trained by the Hawaii Rifle Association, they're actually not going to be stupid enough to run after that mass shooter. They're going to protect themselves as they probably learned to do in the military. So that's a perfect anecdote of what happened on a college campus.
I want to bring in this one, another point of clarification, because we have so many, and we're so happy that you are with us here tonight. Shauna in Honolulu, if you have a permit to carry a firearm, are you able to carry any type of firearm from a pistol to an AR-15? Now, the law says concealed carry, but it doesn't specify the type of weapon, or does it?
It's a handgun, and so we don't allow long gun concealed carry.
And is that just because they would be too hard to conceal? I mean, how did that come to be?
That's part of it. It's hard to conceal, but in order to protect yourself, in considering the Supreme Court decision, Honolulu PD, with conjunction with the state attorney generals, it was, I believe it was decided on that it would be handguns.
Okay, Representative Pierick, to that point, do you think that there should be that type of restriction? Jack, retired U.S. Navy on the Big Island, says the Second Amendment is law and it is our right, period. Under that interpretation, perhaps AR-15s would be allowed. What's your take?
Yeah, under analogous law, in the Bruin case, it talks about a firearm, or basically the right to bear arms. So the term arms in the Second Amendment, according to the Bruin case, is restricted to something that you as a single person can carry, or can be on your person, or a shield. So something that takes two people, that's not included. Something that you can't hold by yourself, that's not included. It's something that has to be able to be carried by yourself, used by yourself, and can be able to be stored on yourself.
Judge, I want to get back to this idea of liability and what happens, because what happens to someone who does, in self-defense, perhaps shoot another person? What are the laws here in Hawaii, since we are not a stand your ground state? What happens? What are the criminal consequences?
Yeah, the laws in Hawaii is that you are allowed to use reasonable force to defend yourself. So if you are confronted with imminent deadly force, you can use deadly force to defend yourself. So if someone is coming at you like they're going to punch you, you can't shoot them, obviously, because you're not being confronted with deadly force. The problem is that it'll go through the process. So, for example, if someone shoots someone and kills that person, it's a defense, self-defense. The police would probably investigate, make a determination whether or not the person was acting in self-defense or not. If the police and the prosecutor decides that the person wasn't acting in self-defense, that person would be charged for the homicide or the injury that was caused. It will take its course, go to the trial. The defense would be raised, self-defense. And if the jury believes that the person was acting in self-defense, the jurors could find them not guilty. So it'll go through the process.
Just to clarify real quick and kind of expand on it, it isn't just death. It's the fear if the actor is preventing, or if he is in fear of serious bodily injury, death, kidnapping, forcible sodomy, or rape. So it's not just, if someone is punching you in the face, right? If they knock you out and take your gun, it's probably not going to be a good day,
okay,
right?
Yeah. I tried to simplify it, but basically you're correct. If you're confronted with death or serious bodily injury, which is the risk of death, you could use deadly force, okay? I stand corrected, but I tried to simplify it with the question in terms of what will happen to a person.
Yeah.
And you can defend other people.
And you can defend other people. So if you see someone getting kidnapped, you can shoot the kidnapper. But there seems to be this idea that us gun owners, we just want to go around shooting bad guys. That's not the case. I don't ever want to have to shoot somebody. Not ever again. I never want to shoot someone. But if I need to do it, it's something that there would be a very specific set of reasons. And in 2013, a study conducted by the CDC determined that there were at least 250,000 and as much as 3 million self-defense gun uses every year. If all of those self-defense gun uses involve shootings and death, there would be at least 250,000 gun deaths. But that's not the case, because people that own guns, that carry them for self-defense, the defense of others, we don't want to shoot people. Guns are more than often used as a means to defuse a situation and retreat to safety, right? So the idea that we want to just go around creating the Wild West and being John Wayne is a ridiculous notion. And the fact that we're often looked at as criminals just waiting to commit crime, right? We're just not criminals yet. which is what Chris was saying earlier. We're just not criminals yet. You have the means. Now you're just looking for the opportunity to go shoot someone and be a criminal. That's not how it works.
You know,
Chris, I want to give you the opportunity to respond.
No, I mean, I agree with Kainoa when he talks about where he stands on this, that he's not a criminal, that he doesn't want to shoot somebody, and that he's not out there looking for a fight. He doesn't speak for every gun owner in Hawaii. He doesn't. Even as the head of the Hawaii Rifle Association, he doesn't speak for all of their emotions and their desires and their wants. And there are probably people out there who can, who are hotheads, but whose doctor will write them a letter and who can probably get this permit and will use it for nefarious means. We will have more gun deaths in Hawaii because of the Bruin decision, period, end of story. We will. But I think the interesting part, the interesting part here is that Kainoa and I actually agree for once on something right here. We're both veterans, right? And he said he does not want to shoot and kill anybody ever or ever again in his life. I feel the same way. I've been to combat. The reason I don't own a gun in my personal life is because I don't want the moral injury of having to take a human life in any way, shape, or form. I have a Louisville Slugger next to my bed, and I will use it if I need to protect myself or my family. I hope I don't kill the person. I don't want that on my soul, on that burden on my soul. But the fact is that not everybody thinks that way, and this idea that we have to have guns to protect us from guns, and to protect us from those guns we need to have more guns, and then we have more guns and more guns, and you've seen it in most of the states in the country. Isn't that what the gun lobby has been feeding us for so long? Isn't the one thing that's happening with all of this rhetoric gun sales? They're just making more and more money because guns are needed to protect guns and protect people from other guns.
I want to bring this one to Tyler dos Santos-Tam, council member. Just a question here. Who will enforce and how will these restrictive gun laws be enforced if someone who is permitted goes into an area that is deemed a prohibited place? What would be the repercussions for that? That's from Judy in Honolulu. My understanding is that it is a misdemeanor. Is that correct?
It is a misdemeanor, and just like every other law, it is up to HPD to help enforce. So, for example, let's say somebody, insists on bringing in a concealed carry weapon into a hospital or into a school. What's going to happen? You are going to call HPD, but that person will be cited. The flip side to this, though, is in the scenario that, in other states where we don't have this law, there's no repercussion. There's no way to stop these people. So, when we say that, people are going to break these laws, so why have them in the first place? We need reasonable, common sense regulation, and under Bruin, we're allowed to do that. It is not an absolute right. You can't bring a gun on a plane. You can't, and according to Bruin, you can establish sensitive places, which we did. And again, we need to back that up, as Jim mentioned, with the historical tradition behind it. But the Supreme Court did not say no regulations whatsoever, throw them all out the window. They said you as a municipality, you as a state can do this, and we in Hawaii, and we as a council have decided that we want to make sure that people here are going to be reasonably protected within the boundaries of the law.
I mean, Jim, to that.
I agree. You have to be proficient, safe, trained. You can't drive a car. Well, you can. You're not supposed to drive a car until you get a permit and then you get a license, because you can kill people with cars. It happens a lot, actually. But there's actually not a single study that I'm aware of. And if you can cite me a study, I will look it up. There is not a single study by any university or any medical or gun group or whatever that says crime goes up when concealed permittees commit crimes, because concealed permittees are not committing the crimes. And these statistics often include suicide in the gun fatality numbers, which it really shouldn't be, because that's not what we're talking about. I would like Chris to give me an article citation that I can read that says people with concealed carry licenses have been committing more crimes than before they had their licenses, because it's not there.
I have it right here. It's
great.
RAND Corporation, and they look at studies, they look at all the studies and look at all the stuff, and they're saying there's supportive evidence. Now, there's a lot of gray areas in gun laws that I admit that the things are not all linear, but it's pretty clear concealed carry laws may increase violent crime.
May increase.
They're not actually saying that people with the permit did the crime.
Maybe.
That's my point.
And
they don't have a
the
single
best
study.
evidence we have.
It's hypothetical.
Let's.
And I think
we have just about 2 minutes
supported
left.
evidence.
So let's hear from the.
And I think this goes back again to, the folks who go through this process, and it is a rigorous process at HPD, have met all the criteria. And I think, that's very clear. The problem is the more guns there are in a community, if they aren't locked up safely, and again, if we have 1,000, 10,000, however many, not every gun is going to be secured safely. There will be an instance where somebody breaks into your house, steals it, and uses that to commit a crime. We don't want guns to be proliferating in our community unchecked, which is why we have a framework that I think is reasonable. It's common sense. It's not just sensitive places, but it's a number of other things here in Hawaii. And that's, what I think we're trying to do in keeping people safe. And I think we have this process. We want to make it clear so those who are doing concealed carry can follow it, but we also want to make sure that it's well enforced. And so there's that balance that we're trying to strike.
Chris, go ahead.
A survey that was just completed last month, as these laws are going through the City Council and the Legislature, found that 95% of Hawaii residents, including 94% of gun owners, support training for concealed carry. I think everybody here does too. 90%, 9 in 10, support sensitive places to include schools, playgrounds, government buildings. And less, but still 75%, and I'm looking at our lawmakers here, 75% of our residents support sensitive places that include protest areas, crowded public places, basically everything else named in the bill. So 3 out of 4 of your constituents support that. This is what Hawaii wants. This is what Hawaii should have.
And we are
But it's a federal law. It's not a local law. That's a problem.
And I have to stop you there. We're just about out of time. In under a minute, Judge, where do you think we go from here?
Well, fortunately, there's 2 cases that's pending, one in New Jersey and one in New York, that after Bruin, that they have challenged. There were statutes that prohibited in parks, restaurants, museums, etc. So hopefully the Supreme Court will address that and will give us some clarity. I think we need to get a balance of the rights of people to own guns as well as the protection of people. And I'm not saying that the legislature did something wrong by enacting their laws, but I think they're trying their best to try and address the safety.
Okay, and we have to leave it there. This is certainly a contentious issue, one we don't expect everyone to agree on, but we do bring together key stakeholders so that perhaps we can have a better understanding of how to move forward. Mahalo to all of our guests and to those of you at home for being part of tonight's discussion. We'll be back next month for another KΑKOU to talk about the issue of repeat offenders on our roads. Last month, a 16-year-old pedestrian was killed in a hit and run on her way to McKinley High School. The man who was allegedly behind the wheel had 164 traffic violations, many of them serious, and yet was still driving on that February morning. This is just the latest incident to bring this issue to light. So how do we keep these reckless drivers off our roads? We do hope you join us then. I'm Yunji de Nies. Until next time, aloha.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.